Good morning and happy Monday to you. You're watching All You Need to Know on BloombergQuint Live, and I'm Alex Matthew. First, the headlines. Iran admits to shooting down the Boeing 737 jetliner bound for the Ukraine. The administration says it mistook the plane for a cruise missile. Infosys raises its FY20 revenue guidance to 10 to 10.5% from the earlier 9 to 10%. An internal audit also finds no merit in the allegation against CEO Salil Parekh. India's industrial production grew 1.8% in the month of November, this after seeing 3 straight months of contraction. The government may seek interim dividend from the Reserve Bank of India as it struggles to meet a shortfall in tax revenues, according to a person privy with the development who spoke to BloombergQuint. And Yes Bank will now raise 10,000 crore rupees through a QIP. It has also rejected the $1.2 billion offer from Erwin Singh Braik, saying it will consider the offer from Cytax Holdings in the next meet. Let's talk about the US markets now. They ended lower on Friday after lower than estimated jobs data. The Dow Jones briefly went past the 29,000 mark before cooling off. And despite Friday's weak closing, though, the benchmark indices ended the week with gains of between 1 to 2%. Renita Young of Bloomberg News wraps up Friday's Wall Street action in this report.
U.S. stocks closed lower on Friday after the latest U.S. jobs report offered mixed signals on the world's largest economy. While the U.S. added about 145,000 jobs that slightly missed analyst estimates, unemployment remained unchanged at its lowest in about a half a century. That caused treasuries to rise earlier during the session, yet traders are still assessing this information, and no surprise that gold was a little bit higher since there was some concern in markets. Meanwhile, Grubhub was down as it denied its for sale, and Foot Locker was higher despite the downgrade at Susquehanna. And earnings season officially kicks off next week with the big banks. That's a look at your Wall Street action on Friday. In New York, I'm Renita Young for Bloomberg News.
All right, let's turn to the Asia-Pacific region as well. Rosalind Chin is joining us live to tell us about the markets that are currently open. Morning, Rosalind. How are we looking at the start of the week?
Hi, a little bit mixed this morning. A variety of factors, though, really are moving markets. Overall, we've got investors looking at the possible signing of the U.S.-China trade agreement, the Phase 1 agreement, as it's called, with Vice Premier of China Liu He expected in Washington this week for that. And the signing is expected to happen on Wednesday, according to President Trump. Other than that, we've got Japan closed, so those markets aren't doing much today. However, you know, the jobs report that was less than stellar from the U.S. has been filtering through to some of the Asian markets here. The Kospi, however, I have to say, is performing more strongly today. It's up by 0.6% right now, getting a little bit of a boost from its export data. Export numbers for the first 10 days of January have come in, showing that exports actually have increased, rising 5.3% year on year. That is, of course, against a year of pretty much exports in the doldrums. And this is being seen as a bit of a signal that perhaps there is going to be a little turnaround here in terms of exports for Korea. Semiconductor shipments jumped 11.5%, in fact, year on year. So some joy there coming in there for South Korea. So right now, the Kospi is getting a little bit of a boost on the back of that. Taiwan, we just had the elections over the weekend. Tsai Ing-wen, the DPP incumbent president right now, was re-elected in, and we see the markets getting a bit of a boost from that. Now, in general, markets in Taiwan do tend to get a little bit of a boost after a presidential election. Anyway, this time around, we are seeing that happen, a little bit of a bounce there. The TAIEX is up nearly half of 1%. We saw the stocks rising to a one-month high, and in fact, now they're on track to perhaps hit the 30-year highest level in 30 years, which we did see touching recently. However, of course, after this initial reaction, we might see a little bit of pullback. Some profit-taking might happen in the weeks coming up, because there are concerns, of course, about the longer-term relationship between Taiwan and China, because Tsai Ing-wen's DPP party is pro-independence. In Hong Kong and China, well, Shanghai Composite opened a little change right now. It's losing about 1/5 of 1%. Hang Seng Index is up by about 1/3 of 1% right now. And Philippines, there has been a volcanic eruption there, just south of Manila. That has closed the stock market today, so no trading today. The FX markets bond trade also closed. Manila Airport also closed, although we are hearing that that may reopen a little bit later in the day. And we're also seeing that government offices are also closed today. We don't know how long the effects of that volcanic eruption may go on for. Finally, a quick look at Australia. S&P ASX 200 losing by 0.5% right now. Back to you.
Thanks so much for that, Rosalind. Now let's talk about the big headline from last week. Iran braces for more protests internally as well as from the world after the army admitted that it mistakenly shot down the ill-fated Ukraine-bound Boeing 737 jetliner just minutes after takeoff in Tehran. The military has put the blame on human error and said that the culprits will be punished. Ross Kranze of Bloomberg News brings you more on this.
They were faced with overwhelming evidence, really, that the plane hadn't crashed of its own accord or that there's no mechanical problem. And really, after a certain length of time, the investigation showed there was no other explanation but that they had shot down the plane, believing it to be a cruise missile. Not unprecedented in the history of aviation, but still just a shocking and terrible mistake. And the protests that you're seeing across Iran yesterday and today, really, I think the people there just want to see somebody take the rap for this. They want to see some responsibility taken. And in fact, one top official with the Iranian Revolutionary Guard said in their parliament today he wishes he was on the plane. He obviously feels terrible. Whether heads will roll, we don't really know, but people are very angry and want to see really something happen. And at the same time, the Trump administration is looking to exploit this anger. President Trump tweeted in Farsi 3 times this weekend, giving support to the protesters and also warning the Iranian government to not shoot your protesters and allow for free reporting of the protests, basically putting his thumb on the scale in a way.
Raz, ever since the killing and the targeting of Qasem Soleimani, we've heard responses from President Trump and the White House as to why he was targeted. Have we heard more justification from the president?
Well, the big news break on that really came on Friday night when President Trump spoke to Fox News and said that he believed that 4 U.S. embassies, including the Baghdad embassy, were under threat of an imminent attack from Iran. Interesting comments. This certainly had not come up apparently in congressional briefings about the attack on Soleimani. One interesting comment today came from Adam Schiff, the Democratic congressman. He is a member of the Gang of 8, and he said there was no discussion in the classified briefings he had of these 4 embassies being targeted. So we have seen the rationale for Soleimani's killing shift a couple of times between President Trump, Mike Pompeo, the Secretary of State, and the defense chief. And I think you might see more of that in the next few days. It really seems like they don't quite have their story straight.
All right, and we'll bring you updates as and when we get them. Now, meanwhile, U.S. President Donald Trump's National Economic Advisor, Larry Kudlow, says that the U.S. jobs data is still very strong despite missing estimates. In an interview to Bloomberg Television earlier, Kudlow also spoke about trade negotiations with China. Listen in.
We always set expectations and we measure it against this market forecast and that market forecast. But look, you're running 145,000 jobs. That's a great number. Other point, Jonathan, is the unemployment rate is 3.5%. It remains at a 50 or 51-year low. That is a remarkable number with no inflation. And when you look at unemployment, you got to look at the household survey, which very few people do. But you had a 267,000 gain in the household survey, which skews to the smaller, younger businesses to show the vitality of the economy. So I really think this is a strong report. And one last point, you all were talking about the stock market, and Mohammed El-Arian, who's a very bright fellow, was talking about the resiliency and dynamism of the American economy. I just want to add that point as a generic point, if you will. The huge increase in the stock market, I have to believe, is a signal of improving confidence among consumers and businesses, and I think it's pointing towards even faster growth in the next year.
There's some hope that business confidence picks up once the United States and China sits around a table and signs that document next week. So let's talk about that document. Some confusion in the last month, Larry, about whether this has been translated or not. Secretary Mnuchin said on December 19th that it's already on paper, it's already translated. Then Peter Navarro said at the end of the month, all we've waited on is for the Chinese deal is to translate the English version into the Chinese version. Can you just confirm that we've both got this in Chinese and English ahead of next week?
Yes. Look, I spoke to Ambassador Lighthizer last night to reconfirm all this. The translation has been authenticated. The Chinese are coming, as you probably know. Vice Premier Liu He will be here next week, for 2 days. The signing ceremony will be on January 15th. I think it's a Wednesday. President Trump will sign. Vice Premier Liu He will sign. There'll be celebratory dinner and lunches surrounding those signatures. Everything is completely in place. I've seen some of these rumors. Let me just tell you, everything is completely in place. The translation worked. The signing ceremony worked. This is an historic, remarkable deal. And the president was talking about it yesterday when he unveiled his environmental deregulation. Maybe we'll get to that as pro-growth. But on this point, I mean, we really got a lot in phase one, a lot in phase one. What the percentage is, that I don't know. It could be 40%, it could be 50%. And some people are saying, well, gosh, we left the tough stuff for something called phase two. And I want to just quote Ambassador Lighthizer from our conversation last night. He's just such a wonderful fellow, and I always check in before I come on the air with him. You know, nobody ever thought we'd get phase one. No one has ever done phase one before. There is nothing like this in trade history. So that the importance and significance of phase one is enormous.
Let's take a look at what else is making headlines across the globe. Sue Keenan of Bloomberg News brings you the First Word headlines.
Protests erupted across Iran after the government admitted its military mistakenly shot down that Ukrainian airline's jet last week. The Army says the Boeing 737 was downed shortly after takeoff due to human error. All 176 people on board were killed. The admission is a dramatic reversal of Iran's initial comments. Authorities first blamed technical problems for the crash and then said an engine had caught fire.
We made a mistake, and a number of our compatriots were martyred because of our mistake. But it was unintentional. We apologize. We are sorry. But we will make up for it. We will not allow any one of our people to get hurt. We are standing steadfast and firm like a pillar. We get shot, but we do not sit down or kneel.
Meanwhile, Lebanon's Iran-backed Hezbollah group says the missile strikes on U.S. bases in Iraq are only the start of the Iranian response to America's killing of General Qasem Soleimani. Hezbollah leader Hassan Nasrallah told supporters that the attacks were merely, quote, the first step down a long path that will force the U.S. to leave the region. He added that Iran has not yet used what he called its sophisticated weaponry. To the Philippines now. The Philippine Stock Exchange has suspended trading Monday. This amid warnings that Taal volcano south of Manila may explode at any time. Seismologists say that could happen within hours or days, and they are recommending an evacuation of up to 200,000 people. The Taal volcano continues to vent ash and smoke, and all flights have been suspended at Manila Airport. Taal is a tourist attraction and is one of the most active volcanoes in the Philippines. Finally, the head of Human Rights Watch says he has been given no official reason for being denied entry to Hong Kong on Sunday. Kenneth Roth had planned to launch the organization's annual World Report in the city this week, but was stopped at airport immigration and returned back to New York. The move follows China's pledge last month to sanction organizations that it says have performed badly in relation to the protests in Hong Kong.
The focus of the report this year was going to be how the Chinese government is really trying to deliberately undermine the international human rights system, not simply suppress the rights of people at home, but also undermine the ability of anybody else to try to hold China to human rights standards.
Global news 24 hours a day, on air and on Quick Take by Bloomberg, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Sue Keenan. This is Bloomberg.
All right, let's turn back to trade in India. Agam Vakil is here to set you up for that trade and also to tell you what's happening in the futures and options space. Agam, well, seemingly a little more focus on the domestic market now that some of that geopolitical tension has died down somewhat.
Yeah.
How are we looking at the start of trade?
Well, let's start by taking a look at the SGX Nifty futures. It's something that we will determine how the opening is expected to come through. We're expecting a positive opening considering a 0.3% increase and an advance as far as SGX Nifty is concerned. And moving on, how did trade pan out on Friday? We did see about an advance there as well, with gains coming in for the Nifty, the mid cap and the small cap indices. The banking indices as well, they were marginally in the green, but they weren't exactly the ones which were holding the markets up and the benchmark specifically in this case. But let's move on and talk about ADRs. And for now, we are looking at a mixed picture. Tata Motors and Vedanta are up, but I'll be watching out for Infosys clearly, which possibly gave up some of the kind of gains that we did see last Friday, because at one point in time it was up as much as 5%. Of course, this was on a lot of positive news developments along with the earnings as far as Infosys is concerned. We'll be watching out for that. In terms of fund flows, we did have FIs buy stock worth 578 odd crores on a net basis, and DIS sell stock worth 252 odd crores. And moving on to your contributors, we are looking at a lift from HDFC Bank. Infosys was already strong, of course, before its earnings, and Kotak Mahindra Bank along with ITC, among others, which lifted the markets up. What about the futures and options space? Let's also pull that up and take a look at how things are panning up there. So we do have about 1/10, or rather a little less than 1% advance as far as the open interest for the Nifty futures is concerned. And on the other hand, unwinding a lot of it when it comes to the Bank Nifty, even as the underlying remained flat. In terms of your open interest distribution, it's still a 500-point range between, considering the maximum open interest is in the 12,000 put and the 12,500 call. Where is the change in open interest? That's what we want to know. And we are looking at a lot more writing on the higher levels. And this is despite the fact that we saw the Nifty advance. And in terms of the WIX, that's largely stable right now at 14. The Nifty put call ratio is also largely unchanged at around 1.54. And in stocks, other than the fact that Infosys will be an important company to watch out for, Sun TV, Ashok Leyland, Ambuja Cement, all of them are looking at a surge in open interest. Sun TV specifically stands out considering the kind of longs that we saw. In terms of stocks which saw unwinding, we have Max Financial, Torrent Power, and Mahanagar Gas. MGL is starting to wilt under pressure, and there's longs unwinding, so we'll be watching out for that as well. On the whole, Alex, it may very well be not a very, should I say, action-packed day, because we've already seen the benchmarks advance to quite a bit. Let's wait and watch where they take us.
Thanks so much for that, Agam. All right, let's take you through some of the stocks that you have to watch out for and trade today on account of them being in the news. Somit Sarkar is joining me to tell you all about those stocks. Good morning, Somit. What's on your list today?
Good morning, Alex. I'll start off with the result that came in, that is Avenue Supermarts. The results were largely in line with analyst estimates. The revenues were up nearly 24%. Profit was higher by nearly 53% compared to last year, aided by lower tax rate. While on the EBITDA front, it was up nearly 32%. Margins expanded by 30 basis points due to improvement in gross margins. And the company has added nearly 20 stores during the first 9 months of financial year 2020, which is higher than what it did last year, where it added nearly 12 stores. The management also noted noted that the top line growth in the third quarter was in line with their internal expectations. On the other stocks in news, firstly Edelweiss, because they have received a communication from the Enforcement Directorate for dealings with Capstone Forex. Now Edelweiss says that the company do not have any transaction with this company, that is Capstone Forex. Insurance data for the month of December was also released over the weekend, and if you see the individual APE growth in December 2019 for the industry, now that stood at around 16%. Now this is the second consecutive month of strong growth. Company wise, if you see, LIC grew nearly 13% compared to last year, while the private players like ICICI Prudential grew 11% on the back of large sales in saving products. SBI Life grew nearly 17% compared to last year on the back of its large distribution channel, and HDFC Life grew nearly 46% compared to last year. The growth was driven by its newly launched Sanchay Power Advantage products. HCC, because the lenders have initiated a debt and asset carving out of around 2,100 crore rupees to a third-party controlled SPV. Now, according to the company, the balance sheet will be deleveraged and there won't be any debt servicing obligation expected for the next 33 months for HCC. Tata Steel, because the Netherlands arm has executed an agreement for refinancing of its bank debt. Now they have raised term loan facilities of nearly 1.75 billion euros from 19 banks, and this will lead to a reduction of 500 million euros of external debt outstanding in Tata Steel Europe as of March 2019. Hudco, because one of their NPA accounts because the company said that one of their NPA accounts has cleared the principal outstanding worth nearly 726 crore rupees on January 9th and is now out of NPA. Lastly, couple of stocks on the back of Bull deal. Firstly, Sadbhav Infra Projects, where Nomura Group sold 1.34 crore shares, and Reliance Infra, where IndusInd Bank has sold nearly 15.21 lakh shares in the company.
All right, thanks so much for that, Somit. Now, Agam spoke about Infosys in his trade setup for the day, and he told you that there's a lot of positive news that's come up. Of course, the company posted its results on Friday after market hours. Agam Vakil is joining me now to tell you a little bit more about that. Agam, apart from the numbers, one of the big talking points was that whistleblower complaint. Let's talk about that first.
Yeah.
The board saying it's essentially a clean chit.
That's correct. Well, this is largely the audit committee which will carried out investigations into the whistleblower allegations. And if you remember back in October, whistleblowers did allege that, there was certain, impropriety as well as certain executive conduct which was carried on by the CEO as well as the CFO in order to shore up, profits in the short term. Well, the audit committee, of course, which was formed after the complaints were received by the company, and this was in assistance with legal firm Amarchand Mangaldas along with audit firm PwC of PricewaterhouseCoopers. They have found that a lot of that claims found in the whistleblower complaints are unsubstantiated, that there was no financial impropriety or neither was there any executive misconduct from the CEO as well as the CFO. And the allegations regarding the treasury policy as well, which were alleged to be manipulated, those allegations also for now have been found unsubstantiated. So this of course clearly is a positive, considering the resolution of the whistleblower complaints has come in a lot sooner than what the markets were expecting.
Agam, let's talk about those results now. Those were positive as well, and I think what was more key was an improvement in the growth guidance, right?
Right. So, earnings are in line, and so is the growth guidance. When it comes to the revenue growth, we're looking at a 1% quarter-on-quarter growth in constant currency terms as well as in dollar terms. Rupee revenues rose about 2%. Operating margins did see a little bit of an expansion by as much as 20 basis points, but it wasn't substantial. But we must remember that this isn't the largest quarter for the entire IT industry, because there are a lot of furloughs. Profits consequently did grow by around 10.6%, but we must take into consideration a one-off because of reclassification of an asset in the base quarter, which is why the profit growth looks a lot higher. As you said, Alex, we are, of course, we're looking at the revenue growth guidance for FY19 from 9 to 10% to 10 to 10.5%. But again, a lot of analysts were already expecting the higher end of the guidance to be increased, and that came in line. Of course, we must also remember that 3 quarters are now already done, which is why we have a better idea of what the company can do in the final quarter of this financial year. That said, they did post and report total contract wins in large deals at around $1.8 billion, which is also a positive. And well, the margins guidance is maintained at around 21 to 23%. But all in all, well, a reasonably steady quarter for Infosys.
Thanks so much for that, Agam. Clearly a stock that you have to watch out for in trade today. Another stock is Yes Bank, and it was active on Friday as well. In fact, Friday turned out to be a very eventful day for Yes Bank. It started with the Private Lenders Audit Committee Chairman Uttam Prakash Agarwal resigning. The bank's board meeting and subsequent decision to raise 10,000 crore rupees via the QIP followed. Vishwanath Nair essentially takes you through all of those details in this report.
To say that Friday was an eventful day for Yes Bank would probably be an understatement, but it turned out to be that, with a host of news flow coming in for the bank, which of course reflected in the stock price. The Yes Bank stock price ended at about 5% lower on Friday's closing. Let's take a sense of what exactly transpired through the day. The first set of news items that came out was the resignation of Uttam Prakash Agarwal, who's an independent director on the bank's board, as well as the head of the bank's audit committee on the board. In his resignation letter, Agarwal has cited multiple corporate governance concerns. He's also cited that there were issues with respect to compliance, as well as the manner in which the bank's MD and CEO Ravneet Gill, also Rajiv Uberoi, who was the head of governance, as well as Sanjay Nambiar, the legal head of the bank, all of them, how they conducted their duties. There were serious questions being raised in his resignation letter. He also said that he has written to the board on the 9th of January with respect to what has happened, what has transpired within the bank, and that this resignation was subsequent to that. We do not have a copy of the letter that was sent to the board on 9th of January, but we do have a copy of the resignation letter, and this is from that. Let's get a sense of what then Yes Bank did a few hours later. Essentially, it issued a rebuttal to the stock exchanges where it said that it has received this resignation. However, there is something more to the story. Essentially, in the letter that the Yes Bank has put out to the stock exchanges, you will see in the text of that letter that the bank was already in the process of reviewing the fit and proper status of Agarwal within the bank's board, because this was directed by the Reserve Bank of India. So in this respect, the bank has already been reaching out to eminent jurists to get some kind of legal opinion in the matter, and that on the 10th of January, that is on Friday, the Nomination and Remuneration Committee of the bank was going to review this status. So things became slightly more clearer that Friday was going to be the day where the bank's board was going to decide what is going to be the future of Agarwal with respect to the bank's board. And right before that, of course, he tendered his resignation, raising many questions. But Friday also brought another source of news, because essentially this board meeting that took place was to look at investment proposals that the bank was already in the process of looking at over the last few months. And in that was an important story where Irwin Singh Brech and SPGP Holdings, which were going to invest about $1.2 billion within the bank. This was an investment offer that has been on the table since 30th of November. That has now been rejected by the bank's board. Remember that the bank had put out a stock exchange notification where it had listed a number of investors who were looking to invest about close to $2 billion. Of that, $1.2 billion just came from one investor, so now that stands rejected. As far as the next largest investor in the group, in the list that the bank put out is concerned, Cetax Holdings with a $500 million offer, that is still being considered by the bank's board. It said that it could not finish the necessary formalities on Friday, and that in the subsequent board meetings it will take up that offer. Alongside that, the bank has also said that it will approach its shareholders to raise about 10,000 crore through private placement. This could be through QIPs, FCCBs, or through other securities that can be sold to investors, and thereby that money can be raised. However, apart from SPGP Brech and Cetax Holdings, there was a whole host of investments that were listed by the bank back in November. The bank has not said anything about these investments, specifically this top-tier US fund, which was going to invest about $120 million. There was also Discovery Capital, Watt Ferry, Aditya Birla Family Office. Apart from this, of course, the GMR Group. There was also Rekha Jhunjhunwala. All of these investments still remain in the dark. We're not entirely sure what the bank intends to do with these investments. Things have become clearer with respect to Irwin Singh Brech, because that has now been taken off the table. But Cetax Holdings will be considered in the next round. So we need to see how that investment pans out, of course, this 10,000 crore fundraising that the bank is going to do, that is also going to be key in helping the bank shore up its capital base, because it is currently facing a high NPA ratio and a whole host of issues with respect to stressed assets on the bank's book. So to cover for all of that, it will need that capital. Plus, of course, it will need that capital to grow further, which is the need for the bank right now.
All right, let's zoom out a little bit and take a look at India's economy now. India's factory output registered a marginal uptick in November. That's the first in 4 months, and it's also in keeping with some of the other macro indicators that are showing signs of a recovery. Pallavi Nahata reports.
India's industrial output rebounded in November after 3 consistent months of contraction. Along with other high-frequency indicators, these figures suggest some stability in the economy, even though signs of a recovery remain modest. IIP rose 1.8% in November on an annual basis, compared to a contraction of 3.8% in October. This was according to a release by the Statistics Ministry on Friday. The rebound in November is largely led by a low base effect. IIP had grown by just 0.2% in November 2018. It was still higher than the Bloomberg poll of 32 economists, which expected IIP growth in November 2019 at 0.3%. A breakup of the index shows that 13 out of the 23 manufacturing industry groups saw growth in November. That compares with just 5 of them growing in October. Overall, an improvement in the manufacturing segment, which makes up over 3/4 of the index, has led to the higher figures. Manufacturing output grew at 2.7% in November, compared to a contraction of 2.1% in October. Mining also showed an uptick, while electricity generation continued to contract, but at a deaccelerating pace. Manufacturing of motor vehicles, food products, tobacco, computers, and machinery and equipment was some of the categories that continued to contract in November. Industrial output, when broken up by the end use of goods, showed contraction across most major categories except intermediate goods and consumer non-durables. Overall, economists remain cautious over what the rebound in IIP could mean. Aditi Nair, principal economist at ICRA, thinks that the index is likely to contract in December once again.
All right, now the government may turn to the RBI yet again as it grapples to meet fiscal deficit targets for the current financial year. Sources have told BloombergQuint that the government may seek another interim dividend from the central bank. Nikunj Ori joins us now for more.
The government may yet again seek an interim dividend from the RBI as it struggles to meet its fiscal deficit target amid a shortfall in tax revenues. This dividend would be over and above the 1.76 lakh crore rupees record payout by the RBI to the government in this financial year based on the recommendations of the Bimal Jalan panel. Remember, this amount included a dividend that the RBI from the RBI's income in the previous financial year, the July-June financial year that the RBI follows, and also about a little over 52,000 crore rupees that the RBI had to transfer the surplus capital that the RBI held in its balance sheet according to the Bimal Jalan panel committee's recommendation. Remember, the panel had also suggested that the practice of transferring an interim dividend needs to stop, and an interim dividend to the government can only be given under exceptional circumstances. Now, the government is of the view that the GDP is expected to grow at the slowest pace since 11 years in this financial year, and this year itself is an exceptional year, and the government can seek an interim dividend from the RBI. This interim dividend would be from the July-June 2020 financial year that the RBI follows, and a decision to transfer this interim dividend would be taken up in the central board meeting of the RBI, which is a customary board meeting scheduled after the presentation of union budget. So this meeting would happen after the budget is presented, and will take a call whether the interim dividend will be transferred to the RBI in this financial year. Over to you.
All right, so the US jobs report and its impact on international markets, everything that's happening in Iran, and of course earnings back home. How will Infosys react in trade today? Watch all of that right here on BloombergQuint.